Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for the September Cataloging Roundtable. This morning, we're kind of covering basically a single topic, really. We're going to mostly be talking about headings in our records and how validation works in the MARC edit screen and how it does and doesn't work. We will take a little look at our local thesaurus that the cataloging committee established. Gosh, what is it? A couple years ago. And it's kind of changed a little since then. So we'll look at the current genre form headings that we have. We're going to briefly talk about removing variable fields and then a couple announcements. And also, I wanted, if you have, as we go through and you have questions, or if you have specific examples that you want to look at together, let's absolutely do that. So cataloging resources, we have the procedures guide, the useful websites for catalogers, which it's a live document. I'm always trying to update it when I find something that might be useful, or if you recommend something to me, and I'm trying to organize it in a way that's easier to search. I also just added it to our website. Let me bring that up. Maybe not in the easiest to find way, but under member resources, training, I might add it to the documentation page as well. Under the reference materials, I have a link right there, but it's also there in the slide deck if you want that. Let me put a link to the slide deck in here as well. I don't remember if anyone else has joined us since starting. And then the cataloging interest group playlist. Some of the questionnaire submissions kind of asked about things that we've recently covered. So I wanted to make sure we added that playlist there so you can see what we have done this past year. We covered a little bit of RDA, especially the more common fields that you will see on our records. We looked at the fixed fields, so the most commonly used fixed fields for different formats in Evergreen Indiana records. We took a semi-deep dive into authority. So we looked at how to use the Library of Congress authority thesaurus, how to search that and what they mean. And then in July, we talked about the how to catalog board games, world languages. We looked at addition statements and merging records. So this is definitely a great resource if you want to look back on something. And there are, of course, other older from 2021 videos that are listed. I also wanted to mention a couple updates that have been, one I just saw in a listserv, and then a couple have been mentioned. The Library of Congress has approved these headings in the last year or so or less. So they've actually recently approved a true genre form heading for large print books. Previously, we would use large type books, but it was never in the actual LCGFT thesaurus. So they actually have large print books available now, which we can use. We haven't, the committee will be discussing whether or not we want to change the large type books to large print. So that's likely going to be discussed at our next meeting in October. While we have we have a couple, or at least we have one thesaurus that is useful for cataloging video games. The Library of Congress has approved this video games genre heading. So this is now a valid heading that you can use in this format in our records. And then this one was recently approved. I think it was on the August 8th list, that fairy tale comics is an approved heading. Out of the ones that were listed, I thought these were the ones that were more likely to be used in our catalog. Okay, so I was asked to sort of specifically talk about BISAC headings because it sounded like people may be removing them from the records, which we don't want to do. So I wanted to talk briefly about the 6XX fields, where we get them. They are subject access points taken from an established thesaurus. So of course they cover personal name, corporations, organizations, actual like subjects, genre forms, and things like that. They cover a broad range, not just like subject or topics. We get them from the Library of Congress. They have a subject heading thesaurus and a genre form term thesaurus. We also get them from the OCLC's guidelines on subject access to individual works of fiction, drama, etc., or more commonly seen as GSAFD. Of course, we have the Book Industry Study Group, which is BISAC. You'll also see FAST subject headings, genre terms for tabletop games, and the OLOC video game genre vocabulary. There are a couple places to find like these little codes, the source codes for vocabulary, rules, and schemes. This lists those source codes. You can search by the code. Let's look at, so CFG is in here, or okay, well, it's not showing. But you can go through here and see the source code for these sources. And then the Library of Congress has a list of controlled vocabularies with their codes as well. So we have the medium of performance thesaurus for music, ethnographic thesaurus, thesaurus for graphic materials, subject and genre terms, and these also go into a little detail of when they should be used. The BISAC, or the Book Industry Study Group headings, these are subject codes used by publishers, retailers, libraries, and distributors. They are what you'll probably see on the back of a book. It might say like fiction animals, or if it's in religion, biblical studies, you might see it on the actual book. In Evergreen, Indiana, or just in MARC Records, the entire heading is in a single subfield A. The first term, the head term, or like the broadest term, is going to be in all capital letters. And then each individual like subject, as we narrow it down, is separated by a space / space. They are in a 650 tag. They're not a 655 genre form heading. They are a subject heading. We have a second indicator of 7 because we are denoting the thesaurus this is located from in a subfield 2. So these are just 2 examples of the BISAC headings. And we don't put BISAC, which is just the basically acronym for the actual study group. We use the BISACSH. I assume the SH is for subject heading. But there are links to the headings list in the slides if you would like to look at it further, and if you need to find a heading that is appropriate for your item. So let's look at the young adult fiction. So when we click on the young adult fiction, we are taken to a little bit more information about where we want to use this. So works of young adult fiction ages 12 to 18 or grades 7 through 12. It goes into a little bit more detail, and then it breaks down the available BISAC headings. So if you have a teen book about where horses are a primary topic or part of the book, you could put young adult fiction, animals, and horses. That could be a BISAC heading that you include. but they go into pretty good detail. Let's look at true crime and see how they break it down. This might not be a positive one to look at, but see, it's I think might be easier for some to look at items using this type of heading. And it is a valid version. So if you see them in the record, please do not delete them. They will not validate in Evergreen, Indiana. But again, it doesn't mean they are wrong. I always recommend if this pops up, because and we'll go into a little more detail about validation in a second, but if you do validate your headings before you save or as you are cataloging and editing the MARC, check the list to make sure that this is a valid BISAC heading, and then you can just leave it even if it's showing that it is not validated. And while we're on the subject of validating, so when we say we are validating headings in Evergreen, Indiana, there is an option while we are looking at the MARC edit to validate the bib records 1XX, 6XX, and 7XX fields, actually along with the 8XX fields. If there is a heading that is found in our authority files, what we have in Evergreen, Indiana, then a green check mark is going to appear. However, if it is not in the thesaurus, like all of the BISAC headings, it's going to get a red exclamation mark at the end of it, and it's all going to turn red. To validate, though, all of the text and every subfield and what is in the subfields must match exactly, which is why sometimes if you think it's correct, it might not validate correctly. But so you just want to you can double check that to make sure whether you have entered it correctly. So in this example, we have Stephen King, 1947. We clicked that validate button. It checked our authority file, found this specific heading, and it gave us a green check mark. We have that BISAC heading that did not meet the grade, and then these other headings that were checked were validated. Now, it does not look at the subfield 2s or 0s. I believe it only looks at the like the subfield A's and V's and the X's, Y's, and things like that. So like the BISAC headings, sometimes they don't validate even though they are correct. So we know that this is a valid heading from BISAC, and we can actually look that up real quick. Let's go to fiction and animals. Okay, so here is our valid heading. So we know that this is correct. It's just not in the thesaurus. So even though it didn't validate correctly, we know it is correct. This is a valid name title heading from the Library of Congress, but it actually, at least at this time, is not in our thesaurus. It hasn't been updated to include that. So that will either be something that we'll need to add, or hopefully is added later in a MARChive update or import, or we'll need to add that manually. And sometimes they validate, but it isn't right for the actual record. So in this example, we have a subject heading for board books. And while that is a valid heading, which is why it was validated, it has the green check mark, it's not correct for this record. The record that I pulled this from is a board book. It's not about board books. So this would need to be changed to a 655 because it is a form heading. So both are valid, but with this particular record that we pulled this from, this is not correct in the way of saying that. Again, it is a board book. It is not about board books. And then Other times the heading is actually incorrect. So when you find a heading that you try to validate and it comes up incorrect or it comes up invalidated, we'll bring up, let's say, the Library of Congress thesaurus, because that's probably might be the easiest to search. We'll search the thesaurus for the correct term, so we can search for great white shark, and then we'll follow the trail for the established heading. So in this example, we have great white shark from our results, but it has a reference button, which means that it is not an established heading, but it is referenced in an established heading. So as we go through our search results, we find an authority record for white shark. And then when we look at the authority record, we see a 450, which is a C from, which means that they are not established headings, but are common headings to look at that are covered by another term. So we have like the C from and the 450. So these are the unestablished headings, and the 550, which would be other established headings that you could see also, or maybe they are broader or narrower terms to what is in the 1XX field. So we have in this authority record, we have white shark under the established heading. So we are going to replace the great white sharks heading in the record with white shark. And then as we validate again, it goes through the process and we get a green check mark. It's very possible that as you go, because you will get headings that are not validated because of a free-floating subdivision like fiction or juvenile literature. That will happen. I have found Library of Congress is actually creating what I'm just calling today stub records for validation purposes. So if you were to look up, in this example, man-woman relationships with the subdivision fiction, it's going to bring up this record, but there's going to be a field that says record generated for validation purposes. So it's not a truly established heading, per se, but a record has been created so it will validate. So a couple of years ago, Evergreen Indiana Cataloging Committee decided to establish their own local thesaurus. We had established a number of subject headings, and we've added a couple genre form headings as we've gone along. But then Library of Congress finally updates some of the headings that we were creating because they hadn't caught up yet. So our local headings that we had for subject headings were superseded by the Library of Congress updated headings. But if there were headings, you would see it in this format in our records. So we would have the 650 with that second indicator 7, denoting that there should be a subfield 2. We'd have the subject heading here, and then we'd have EGINS for the subject heading. We do still have some local genre form headings. We are currently using LGBTQIA+ fiction, Christmas stories, and Library of Things. And these will have a subfield 2 of EGING. And these are in the 655. Now, I don't know if the LGBTQIA+ fiction will be superseded by the one that I think was recently placed into the Library of Congress. I'm not sure. That would, of course, be determined by the cataloging committee. I just wanted to do a quick reminder of when we remove variable fields, what we can remove, what shouldn't be removed, like subject headings, unless that heading is just completely off the mark. That title has nothing to do with that heading whatsoever. That's when you should remove the heading. Otherwise, like BISAC headings need to stay, FAST headings need to stay, headings in other languages, like those French headings, need to stay because they're helpful to someone out there. So there is a list in the cataloging procedures guide. Let me close some of these. That lists all of the variable, excuse me, the variable fields that should be removed if they are found in the MARC record. So some of them are being removed because they are obsolete. They have been replaced by other tags, like the 440 has been replaced with the 490. We remove 59X fields because those are, and 69 because those are for local holdings or local information, when we do not include local information in our records because we are a consortium. And then a couple of them, like the 9XX fields, this might seem a little, or it was a little confusing at first because these were all on the same line. So to me, it looked like that it was just adding the list of things to remove. However, for 9XX fields, we remove all of those except for the 901 and 994, which are automatically generated when we create a new record, and the 949 fields used for adding government documents. So if they are in the record, they would look like this. They would have a subfield H with these terms in them. So if you ever have any questions or are in doubt about something that should be removed or if it should stay, please ask. If you don't want to ask the listserv, you can ask the cataloging committee chair, which is Monica Riley, or you can email me and I can ask the committee if you don't feel comfortable asking them directly. There are several avenues that you can take. Or you can ask your regional coordinator. Not your regional coordinator, your regional cataloging committee contact. So valid subject headings should not be removed from the MARC records unless, again, they are completely off the mark. Headings with a subfield to local should be removed. The only time you don't want to remove local headings, we don't tell them to add a subfield to local, but if it is a valid local history term, like for locations, important local figures, or groups, we allow those in the catalog. I didn't get to see Jocelyn's session at the conference, but I know she has also done a webinar on local headings, and I'll see if I can find it and link it to add it to the useful links for catalogers website. So are there any questions or examples you want to look at for any of the for subject headings or for validating? It might be a good idea if we actually look at an example of validating. So you know what I'm talking about when you validate. That might be useful. So I'm just going to bring up my dummy record. Okay. So when we talk about validating a record, this is the button that I am talking about when we are checking to see if the headings in the record are in our authority file. So we have a 100 field for Stephen King. We have a couple subject headings, a couple genre headings, and an 800. So let's click the validate button. Depending on how many fields it has to check, it might take a moment. So I've clicked it. Okay, so the green check mark means that it found a authority file for the heading. We knew that the fiction, the BISAC heading, was not going to get a green check mark. We have these that have validated. The 800 Olive E. Blake, if we know that it's validated, but if we look at our authority file, let's bring that up real quick. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to put in her name and select author. So we have her right here, great, but we don't have the name title record. So let's take a look at the Library of Congress and search for the same. So I'm going to enter Blake. I'm just going to put in her name, and we're going to look under name, title, authority headings. So when we go through here, we have the authorized heading for Blake Olivey Atlas Series, because when we click on that and go through the links, we have that established heading. So we know it is correct. It's just not validating in our file because it's not there. If we were to add, let's do Charlene Harris, Lily Bard Mysteries. Okay, so we've added that. We're validating. And as you validate, it's actually going to make them all seem like they are all invalidated until it finishes, and it's going to refresh. So that is a heading that was found in our authority file. However, if we add the numeration, which we do, and then we go back and validate, it's going to change that green check mark to an exclamation point because it's looking at every single subfield. And we know that the headings do not include numeration. So keep that in mind if you do use the validate button to check your the 1, 6, 7, and 8XX fields because it might be because it has to look at the entire tag. So now we can go back to, are there any questions or examples or anything in this wheelhouse that you want to look at? Well, feel free to keep typing if you are. Just a reminder too about parts. I know. Remember to add parts if your library creates on order holdings. Try to remember to add parts when appropriate. So when patrons place holds on those records, that your item is actually targeted when they have entered or when they have requested a part level hold. And then also just a friendly reminder that all movie and or television holdings must have a part attached regardless of transit status. So even if you don't transit your DVD collection, they still need parts. And if you are adding your holdings to a record and you are adding parts for your item, if it is a valid reason to, please contact the other libraries with holdings. Okay, so there are a couple examples. Let's see. I'm gonna go up here. Let's see, sprains. And then theater. Okay, let's see what happens. I assume they're going to be invalidated because that's why you gave me the example. Okay, so let's take a quick look at, well, we know they aren't listed in our file because that's why they were invalidated. So let's look up in Library of Congress. So we're moving back to subject, and what is it? Sprains, juvenile fiction. Now, this could be part, so okay, we have a Sprains juvenile literature, but it is not validated. That doesn't mean it isn't correct though, because we mentioned those stub records that the Library of Congress is creating to add those floating subdivisions like fiction. There might be some for juvenile fiction or juvenile literature. I don't believe that's necessarily going to do, but let's see what comes up if we just put in sprains. So there's one for the regular subject headings. There's also one for the children's catalog. Since we know these are for juveniles, so let's go for the authorized heading for sprains. Okay. And then I wanted to, okay, so we know sprains is a valid heading. And even if we were to add that, it would most likely validate. I'll probably do that as a 1 because it is a juvenile item. I don't think they look at the indicators though when they are validating or invalidating. They are just looking at the subfields. Okay, so we know sprains. Let me try and use my words. So it is very possible that the free floating subdivisions, which includes basically anything that could be in a subfield, subfield V, a lot of subfield X's, may not validate because they do not have an established authority record. So let's look at, let me think of something else. Let's do, okay, so this one is actually authorized. Oh, see, record generated for validation purposes. So because of that free floating subdivision, juvenile literature, or in your case, juvenile fiction, it has not, a record has not been created or generated just so it'll be validated. So the subfield V's, when you deal with those, might cause the heading to not get a green check mark. But but you'll still want to make sure that the first part, I'm clicking on the chat box like you can see me doing that. You'll still want to check the primary heading, and what's in the subfield A, to make sure that is still valid though. And then you'll also check, let's go down to that. So juvenile fiction, use under names of countries, cities, persons, corporate bodies, classes, groups of fiction, and topical headings. Let's see. Okay, sprains, fiction. Let's see. Okay, that'll be the same thing because fiction is a free floating subdivision. So that is likely why that is not displaying as validated. Because if we put it in here, see, we do not have we do not have an authorized heading for sprains fiction. But we do have one for sprains, and fiction and juvenile fiction are free-floating subdivisions. If you would like to read more about free-floating subdivisions, I'm going to put the link here in the chat. This is part of the subject headings manual by the Library of Congress. I've only saved a few of them directly just for reference. But this, if you really want to get into subject headings and how they can and can't be established or like built like with free floating subdivisions, this is an an interesting resource to use and can be helpful. But these go into different areas. So we have, like, here's one for scope notes. So this, when I was learning about authority records, this helped me learn what those scope notes actually meant when I was looking at a record. The next evergreen community cataloging interest group is, let's see, question is, what if a heading is validated but not accurate? That will definitely happen. So let's, okay, James Patterson. So are you looking at the series or just his, like, a name title heading, or just like his personal author? Okay, so let's, okay, so let's get this in here. It could be because that there is an authorized heading for a pattern, like if they didn't have the birth date. So the actual, I might be remembering this incorrect. I can't remember if it's 1947 or 49. His yeah. Yeah, we assume most of the time that the titles in the catalog are for the actual James Patterson. Does anyone happen to remember if he's a 47 or 49? I can't remember. Let's just see what pops up here real quick. Okay, it is 1947. Thank you. Okay, so we have, this is the actual heading for the New York Times bestselling author James Patterson. This is similar to, remember when I talk about Stephen King, that there are over 40 established headings for the name Stephen King. So this is similar to that issue. And you may actually see this with, I want to say, like, Overdrive Records. I have, why is that not? Oh, there it goes. It just needed a moment. Okay, so we have the actual heading for the New York Times bestselling author James Patterson, 1940, validated, but we also have the Patterson, James without a date validated. And that is because if we were to, let's just do it in Library of Congress because it'll just be easier. Okay, so we're looking up the name, Patterson James. Okay, so there are a number of headings available for James Patterson, whether it is the actual James Patterson that we know and may or may not love, or let's see who the plain James Patterson is. So I'm going to click on authorized heading and go through here. All right, let's see. So this is an author. This James Patterson is also an author. However, he is not the author. Oh, he's also, looks like maybe a guitarist. So the 670s, these are used for where the information was taken from, like the resource. So you can see here, we say, let's see, author of the estimated impact of California state and local sales tax on households. That's super kind of boring. Author of History of Beaver County. So maybe he's a nonfiction author. Guitarist on Uncle John Patterson, James Patterson guitar. So he has been established as a musician. Now, if we were to go back to, oh, okay, so we have these others. Well, we know our James Patterson is not deceased. And so this one also has the highest number of bib records. So this column tells us how many records in the Library of Congress are using this particular heading. So there are 717 bib records in the Library of Congress that are using the James Patterson 1947. And when we look at here, we have a link to the actual authority record, but we have a C also, which means that it's linking us to another established heading with maybe it could be a pseudonym that they use, like Stephen King has, oh gosh, it's Richard Bachman. So you would see that as a C also because they are the same person. So when we click on authority record and keep going here, and we look at the 670s, let's see. This information was taken from Home Sweet Murder from 2018. This is title page. There is some Wikipedia information. Let's see what else. Suspense fiction, that's a really good indication that this is likely our James Patterson. Novelists. And okay. So long story short, if you find a heading that is validated, especially like when it comes with like personal names like James Patterson, Stephen King, it's always good to double check. Another thing I have used in the past are the facets. So if I am looking up, let's do an author search for Patterson. Just do Patterson James and exclude electronic. Okay, so if we look at the facets over here, now this isn't probably not the entire list because remember we do not have with the angularized staff catalog, we cannot see all of these. We would have to go into the traditional catalog in order to see all of them because there might be a more button. But we can see there are for personal authors, there are 862 records with this personal name, Patterson James 1947. There are 106 here. James T. There's actually another one for the 1947. Usually when it looks like a duplicate, it's usually an issue with punctuation. So let's click on the James Patterson name. Okay, so some of these occur when I know for on order items because the record is just it's a stub record. It hasn't been updated yet, so we will likely see those on the on order records. However, let's see. So this one came out in 2020, this audiobook, and there it has James Patterson as the author. We know it's going to validate. See, it already validated it connected to that James Patterson, but that's not the correct James Patterson. So if you do see that, please update it. So you will need to remove the subfield 0. And then we are going to add a comma, subfield D, and 1947 hyphen. Now we can just leave it because every night, we're going to go ahead and save that. Every night there is a job that runs that looks at the newly edited records and looks through all of those headings to link them to the authority file in our thesaurus. I think it's more easily noticeable on those high profile names like James Patterson, like Stephen King. It's when you get into the smaller, maybe less notable names where you might not think to look at the heading. Would that prevent dedupes, the validated headings? I don't know. I would think the 100 might, because I believe that is one of the tags used to compare, but I don't believe any of these subject headings are specifically. They might look to see the bib record quality level. If one is higher, they might put that one in front of the other. I'm not 100% sure personally how the deduplication works. I know that they look at specific fields though. So if there is a the First Lady, James Patterson, without the date, and then there is another one with the New York Times bestselling author heading, it is likely that those will not merge. We have another advanced cataloging parts 1 and 2 set up for the end of September on the 27th and 29th respectively. So if that is on the calendar, if you know someone that needs to take that in order to become eligible for Cat 1. The next Evergreen, Indiana Cataloging Committee meeting is October 6th at 10 a.m. Oh, I'm sorry, there was another question from Jonathan. What is the difference between juvenile fiction and juvenile literature? That is a very good question, Jonathan, that I personally can't answer in a coherent way. I would recommend, well, let's just look at it together. So let's make it a little bigger. So here it says juvenile literature should be used under subjects, and juvenile fiction is you can use under all of this, and the thing is topical headings and under subjects. That is as close as I can get you right now as to the difference. If someone else knows that has been cataloging longer than I have, who has a more better way to look at it, then please comment. Because we were actually talking about this in the last authorities working group for the Evergreen community. What is the difference between subject and topic? Okay, Shelley says, looks like proper nouns for juvenile fiction. Okay. So if we were looking at those, what were those examples? Sprains and theater. Those would more likely be under juvenile literature. Is that what you're saying, Shelley? And then like the fictitious characters like Garfield would be under juvenile fiction. But that makes sense when you look at this. Names of countries, cities, persons, corporate bodies, these are all proper nouns. Classes of persons, ethnic groups, deities, mythological or legendary figures. Yeah, these are all. And then that topical headings, that is where it. But yeah, it looks like you would use, yeah. I like to separate from nonfiction material for real people, etc. Right. That makes sense because nonfiction would not have juvenile fiction. Thank you, everyone. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.